Have y'all seen the latest Quinnipiac polling around the Trump regime? It's a bad scene for him, y'all. It's not good. Now, you may have missed this polling data that came out on June 26th because we've all been really focused on what Trump is doing and the Republicans are doing, trying to cram this big bloated budget bill down our throats. By the way, if you have not called your Republicans in the House yet, and senators as well, to tell them that if they vote to support this, you will be voting them out in the midterms. I highly recommend that you do that now, or maybe after you watch this video. So there was a poll that came out on June 26th from Quinnipiac, and they asked a whole series of questions about how Americans are feeling about what Trump is doing. And I want to share some of that information with you. Because if you've been feeling like you are all alone in your dissatisfaction, your displeasure, your anger against what Trump is doing, I promise you, you're not. The title of this polling data is "Support Rises for Giving Most Undocumented Immigrants a Pathway to Legal Status versus Deportation." Nearly 2/3 of America's voters say they preferred giving most undocumented immigrants in the United States a pathway to legal status, while only 31% say they would prefer to deport them. Right? Quinnipiac is a highly reputable, large poll of nationwide voters. The poll shows that this is a significant change from roughly 6 months ago. It's nearly a 10% bump in the number of voters in the United States who think that we should be giving most undocumented immigrants a legal pathway to stay in the United States. Trump ran on deportation. He ran on kicking brown people out of this country. He ran on escalating what ICE is doing. And yet the more he does it and the more the American people see how devastating it is for our communities, for our neighbors, for the economy, the less and less folks have an appetite for it. In fact, folks are opposed to it. It's not just that they're indifferent. They want something completely different than what Trump and the Republicans are telling us that they are doing now and plan on doing 10 times more of if the big budget bill gets passed. A couple of things to note about that portion of the polling data. It's still really split on party lines, but now 31% of Republicans say that most undocumented immigrants should get a legal pathway to stay here. That is an uptick for them. And also of note is that 71% of independents feel that there should be a pathway for undocumented folks to stay in the U.S. That's really important because Trump got a significant chunk of the independent vote in November. And now nearly 3/4 of those folks are opposed to his immigration policy and actually want something completely, radically different than what he's doing. A majority of Americans now oppose what ICE is doing in the United States. 56% disapprove. There was some other polling that came out a few days later that shows that number is 59%. Again, we're seeing a split along party lines. It's really Republicans who approve of what ICE is doing, and they're often being fed mis- and disinformation about who is being snatched by ICE and what ICE is doing. They're believing propaganda from the Trump regime. But Democrats and independents overwhelmingly oppose it. Donald Trump thought he was going to look big and strong and like a big military leader by sending the National Guard into Los Angeles, but a majority of Americans disapprove of that action. And an even greater percentage, 60%, disapprove of Trump having sent the Marines into Los Angeles. And Trump is underwater in basically everything. His disapproval ratings exceed his approval ratings on pretty much every single metric. Trump's overall approval rating is only 41%. He's just getting going, y'all, and a majority of Americans think he's doing a bad job. The voters overwhelmingly disapprove of basically everything that he's doing. He is fucking up the country and nobody is happy. More folks disapprove of how he's handling the military. A majority of Americans disapprove of how he's handling immigration issues, foreign policy, the Israel-Iran war, the economy. Oh, he's struggling on the economy. All 56% of Americans disapprove of how Trump is handling the economy. 59% disapprove on how he's handling deportations. And you know, tariffs were like the core of his economic and foreign policy. And yet 55% of Americans disapprove of how Trump is doing on trade. The poll also gave Americans a list of 9 issues and asked them which one is the most urgent issue facing the United States today. Guess what the number one response was? More than the economy, more than international conflicts. It was preserving democracy. Keep in mind, multiple polls from earlier this year ranked the economy as the top concern of Americans. It has shifted from the economy to preserving democracy. Nearly half of voters say that American democracy is not working, 49%. And of those, 60% place blame squarely on the shoulders of Republicans. I actually thought this tidbit here was really interesting. Even though the number one concern for American voters is preserving democracy, and even though almost half of Americans think that democracy is not currently working, a vast majority, 73% of folks, think that democracy in the United States will not end in their lifetime. Across the spectrum, no matter what political party folks were affiliated with, they felt that American democracy will be sustained. It will persist. Now, they didn't ask the details of what needs to be done to protect it, right? And we can't really extrapolate too much from those numbers in terms of exactly what people are thinking. But for me, I feel hopeful about that number. You might be tempted to say, well, people have their head in the sand and they are underestimating the threat to democracy. I don't think so, because protecting democracy is the number one concern of folks in this poll. So people understand that democracy is under threat. So to me, and again, that's my personal opinion, when I see these numbers, 73% of Americans do not think democracy in the United States will end in our lifetime. I think people are hopeful still. I think despite the fact that we see a lot of people on social media being defeatist and being doomers, I think the majority of Americans very much believe in our democracy and are hopeful that it can be preserved. Now, shifting from Trump to the Republicans in Congress, 71% of voters said they have heard or read either a lot or some of what is in the Republicans' big bloated budget bill. I mean, concerning to me is still that nearly 30% of America's voters said they have not heard or read much at all about the bill. I'm shocked about that, how so many Americans abdicate their civic duty and choose to be uninformed about what's happening in Congress and the ways it's going to impact them. It says to me we need to continue to get the word out if 30% of voters are unaware. But even so, 55% of voters in this poll are opposed to the big budget bill. That is an uptick in disapproval from the last poll. Now, there was another poll that came out last week that showed that the opposition is more like 2-1. Keep in mind that this is only 6 months in, right? Trump should be riding high. He and the Republicans, they control everything. They should be implementing the policies that he ran on and got him votes. And yet, even so, he is underwater on every single issue. A majority of voters oppose him on every single issue. He and the Republicans are fucking it up on every single issue. What he's doing is incredibly unpopular. No matter what it is that he's doing, it's incredibly unpopular. This is why authoritarians are so desperate to do what's called chill dissent, to get you to be afraid to exercise your rights, to speak out against them, because they know that there is huge public opposition, that what they are doing is deeply, deeply unpopular, and they don't want anybody to know about it. They don't want public opposition to build. They don't want people to find out that their neighbor also disapproves and their cousin across the country also disapproves, and millions and the majority of Americans disapprove. They don't want you to know that. They want you to be quiet and back down. Because Trump and other authoritarians like him, they don't actually have the will of the people. They do not have a mandate to govern. They cannot hold on to their power through legitimate means. That's why they try and depress the vote. They try and discourage you from voting. They engage in voter suppression because they know that once they start to roll out their deeply unpopular and harmful policies, implement their cruel and terrible plans, that the people will turn on them. And so they've got to make you afraid to stand up for yourself, because they know that if the people recognize that it is us that has the power, that we will stop him. They want you to believe that he's inevitable. They want you to give up your rights in advance. They want to discourage you from voting, precisely because they know that it is you exercising your rights and your power and your vote that will stop this. They know that they can't hold on to power if the people rise up in opposition. And clearly the American people are already, just months into this bullshit, are already overwhelmingly opposed to what's happening. So we just need to keep organizing, aggregating our power, and resisting.